I spoke to 135 VCs before I got my first institutional term sheet. I actually had a term sheet, we were getting ready to close on the offer, and then they just ended up walking away. With growth, comes churn. And personally, feeling pretty burned out, I kind of took a step back and started to think about what I wanted to do, and was InsurGrid that long-term thing for me. It was not easy. I think we spoke to 20 firms and we really didn't get any traction. Right before we met is when we were going to close another potential acquirer, and then they backed out that week, and I think we spoke maybe the next week.
I still remember it was 2:30 a.m. and I was like, Chase, I'll just ask the lawyers to just sign up on the dots, tell me what do you want, and we'll close the dots, and we did. We are excited to announce that Helium Ventures has acquired InsurGrid. And today we are going to talk to the co-founder and previous CEO of InsurGrid, Chase Beach. Chase, welcome.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Rohit.
Excited to have you here. How's life been post-exit? You look happy now.
Yeah, life's been great. Me, my wife, and our now 4-month-old daughter, we actually decided to leave California after 10 years, and we moved back to Marymount, Ohio, close to family, and just working on a few projects.
So let's start from the beginning. So you are in Ohio in the town of Marymount. So
Yes.
Talk to me about that. How did you decide to start InsurGrid?
Yeah, so I grew up in Marymount, Ohio, in a family of insurance agents. And I didn't go the insurance route initially. I went out to San Francisco working in tech, and I had come home for Christmas. This was Christmas 2018, and talked to my mom about an issue she was having at her insurance agency regarding data collection. And I really just couldn't believe that this problem had not been solved yet. A plaid for insurance. I can't believe that had not been created. And so I came back to San Francisco and just started emailing insurance agents and talked to 20 insurance agents about this specific data collection problem. And I was convinced that there was a business here. Actually met my first angel investor on an airplane.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he had been in the insurance industry before, and I told him about the problem, and he was like, you have to start this business. And ended up launching InsurGrid March 2020, 3 days into shelter in place in San Francisco.
Holy cow.
Yeah, it just took off from there. I mean, we went from zero to $120,000 in ARR in 4 months, and started doing the fundraise. And to extend runway, I moved back to Ohio to do our fundraise and kind of get InsurGrid off the ground.
Yeah, and from what I understand, obviously your family is all in insurance, and that's how you grew up. But as you talk to insurance agents, for the property and casualty side of things, you realize that every insurance agent just needs more and more data from their prospects, and carriers are kind of tightening down and narrowing the box of underwriting. So as you started building InsurGrid, you found first investors and you moved back home to extend runway. How was the fundraising after you saw traction and you talked to investors?
Yeah, we were always told that $120,000 of ARR is kind of the sweet spot of raising your first round. And so that's what we really focused on. And we had, some angel investors that came along during that process in 2020. And once we got to that $120,000 ARR, we started having conversations. And it was during COVID, so everything was online, which means you could actually do multiple meetings a day, not just driving up and down Sand Hill Road. But I spoke to 135 VCs before I got my first institutional term sheet. And that was from the team at Hustle Fund, Eric, Elizabeth, and Shion.
Got it. And it's fascinating. I think it's important for founders to know that you sometimes don't get a term sheet from the first meeting that you have. It takes a few tries. In your case, 135 meetings over a period of, I'm assuming, a couple months. And then you're constantly pitching. Investors are asking you so many questions, and everyone has their own concern about the idea. They're talking about either the market is too small, or the product just doesn't work, or why insurance agents will use it, so on and so forth. And you just got to push through everything to find that one believer who's going to put money in.
in college, I interned for someone who ran pitch events at the Twitter building on Market Street, and he would always
Uh-huh.
talk about how investors back the jockey and not the horse.
Hmm.
And the firm that led InsurGrid's seed round, Ashmeet Sadana at Engineering Capital. I remember when I first had my meeting with Ashmeet, Engineering Capital, he primarily only invest in engineers. I am not an engineer by training.
Yeah.
And so, but going into it, I just kind of was myself. And, if you're yourself and you're authentic, you're going to find the right people. And Ashmin and I just hit it off, and he liked what I was doing, and he liked my energy. And so you never know where, your funding is going to come from, where your customers are going to come from, but you just have to be yourself.
Yeah, no, makes total sense. I think we try to standardize too much company building advice. In your case, you were in Ohio, like family, business of insurance. You learn the problem from there. Then you go to San Francisco. And then even in COVID, you were pitching hundreds of investors to raise money. There's no straight path as it may seem from the outside. After you raised the money, you immediately took off again, like continued to grow. How did you think about building the team? How did you think about kind of growth from that point on?
Yeah, so we had built the original product, me and my co-founder, with a friend who I knew from college that had a dev shop that was running out of Nepal, and so that was like how the original product was built. And so we knew that we needed to build a team. Me and my co-founder were not technical, so we brought in a head of engineering. We hired a few engineers, and I was doing all of the sales calls. So 2021 just hit the ground running on growth again, and I was doing, 14 to 16 30-minute Zoom calls per day
Wow.
for a stretch of a couple months. And so as we got into the hundreds of customers, I think I signed up the first maybe 300. We had the engineering team going, and then we started building out the sales team. And then they're taking the calls, and then I was focusing on different product stuff as well as different partnerships.
And as you grew revenue, you raised a little bit more money
Yep.
after that, right? Like, so you continued on that growth path. What was that experience like? How were the investor conversations when the numbers are going and up into the right? Did you have to pitch 135 investors again?
No, I didn't have to. I didn't have to pitch anyone. It ended up. This was Q4 of 2021, and so we were doing very well, and we were thinking about raising some more money, and we actually did an inside round with our current investors at a great valuation, and so we were able not to spend time doing that, and just get back to building.
So, end of 2021, you raise a new round, and now you're growing fast and building a team. How did you think about the next steps for the company?
Yeah, at that point, we were just working with smaller insurance agents, and we're a team. We're a team of about 5, and so we started just going after larger agencies, partnering with large software companies in the insurance agent space, working on a new API product. And so that's where we started growing out our engineering team to around 5. We brought on a product person, continuing to hire salespeople as well. And so we went from 0 employees at the start of 2021 to Q1 2022, we had 15 employees, which as
Yeah.
a first-time founder and CEO, learning how to manage an organization like that and the different teams and kind of getting everyone to row in the same direction is something that I focus on and was a challenge. And we were all remote, so how do you work that out? And so we actually did a remote trip offsite to Playa del Carmen, Mexico in February of 2022, which was
Mm-hmm.
fun. And it's actually where I met my now wife.
Wow. So take some lesson from it, I guess. Next
You can
company
meet,
to treat you
yeah,
may,
you never know where you're going to meet your wife.
yeah, meet the love of your life. So you're growing, you're hiring people. But I think in 2022, as it happened with a lot of companies, the macroeconomic environment changed and that impacted growth and valuations. How was 2022 for you, especially as you were thinking about raising the next round?
So we had been growing fast, and with growth, comes churn, but it was all about growth. The conversations in 2021 were all about growth. Just keep growing, keep growing. Obviously, churn is something we thought a lot about, but it's like, hey, let's continue, because there's 1.1 million insurance agents, and let's try to, grab that market. And at that point, there had been some competitors to InsurGrid that kind of sprang up. And so we wanted to capture that market. But as 2022, as the fundraising market changed, conversations went from being about growth to being about profitability and retention. And so we had to just really shift as an organization from being sales led to product led.
Got it. And how were the conversations for the next round with the investors around this time? I remember because we also exited around this time. The market had completely changed, and people don't in 2025 may not remember what 2022 was like.
Yeah, it was not easy. I think we spoke to around like 20 firms, and we really didn't get any traction because it was all about profitability. It was all about retention. Being around $1 million of ARR just wasn't something that was as important anymore.
Yeah. And I think sometimes founders try to run their companies based on what they hear from investors rather than what they hear from customers. And we have had some conversations where you're like, oh, if I had to just focus on customers, I would do things slightly differently compared to if I just talk to investors. So that's something that founders who are running companies can also take away in the conversations. Like, always focus on customers, because the flavor of the month or the flavor of the year may change depending on, what's popular externally.
Yeah.
So you cannot rely on what you hear from investors. So now 2021, fast growth here. You grow from 0 to 15 employees. 2022, you go out in the market. You're not getting traction for your next round. How did you think about moving the company forward from that point on? What else did you try? What else did you consider?
Yeah, I mean, towards the end of 2022, I mean, we were still chugging along. We had just rolled out a new product, started working on a new partnership. But for me, I at that point it had been 3 years working on InsurGrid, and personally, like feeling pretty burned out. And so, I kind of took a step back for me from the day to day and started to think about like what I wanted to do. And was InsurGrid like the long-term thing for me? Luckily, like as kind of some of that stuff started happening, we started talking more, with a potential acquirer. And so that's kind of how, things started progressing towards an acquisition.
So at the end of 2022, like, how did you interact with investors? What did your investors say?
Yeah, so I went to my investors, and I was always, very transparent with them, what was going on, talking with Ashmeet at Engineering Capital or Elizabeth at Hustle Fund with what was going on, and just came to them saying like, hey, I'm at this crossroads with InsurGrid. Like, there's a couple things on my mind. And, the first thing that both of them said is like, hey, we back you, and, whatever you want to do, whatever you think is best for InsurGrid, we support. Which, as a founder, you hear all these stories of these adversarial relationships with investors, and that has never been my experience, luckily. And so that, kind of weight being, lifted, was actually very productive, because I could actually think about what was best.
Yeah. And maybe we can talk about it some other time, but they were also helpful in thinking about the next steps for you and what you could work on next and the next startup idea and things like that. So there are definitely investors who will continue to support you as the person who's building the company, as the jockey rather than the horse. And always try to find investors like those for your companies too. But as you were having these acquisition conversations, I think they ran for a while. You talked to some of the folks and tested the market. What was that experience like?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, InsurGrid was doing well, and it was, right, hovering around profitability. And so we had time. And so started talking with a large player in the insurance agent software space. But, being $100 million company, their pace was slower,
Sure.
and which was fine. But that is like, I think that's like a learning. Like the bigger the company that you work with, the slower the process is going to be. Maybe the larger the outcome it could be, but traditionally they just have to. It's a larger organization, and so while that was going on, talked to a couple of people in the industry. There are some people that were interested in collectively buying InsurGrid. Even an agent was interested in buying InsurGrid. That never really came to fruition. And then spend some time talking to people in the market, the marketplace websites, which I did not have much success with, and just a lot of interest, but didn't really go too far. I actually had a term sheet. We were getting ready to close on the offer. There had been, a good amount of legal work put into the deal, and then they just ended up walking away.
Wow.
And, that
Yeah.
that was a lesson. That was a lesson for me. There's no refunds on legal fees when that
Yeah.
happens.
And the thing that I sometimes tell founders is like it's not closed until they have signed the paperwork and transferred the money. Like that's quite common advice for fundraising, that any indication of interest or diligence or even working towards a term sheet, or even a term sheet, doesn't mean that the deal has closed until you have signed the docs and you have the money in the bank. And it's even more true for acquisitions, because investors want to maintain a reputation and they don't give you a term sheet if they're not intending to close. But the markets are changing rapidly and investors are also changing their mind rapidly. Acquirers are like 3 to 5 times, if not 10 times, more risk averse than venture investors. So they're always very cautious in moving forward. And those acquisition conversations can die for 1,000 reasons that you may not know.
Yeah.
It's like the person went on vacation, something happened in their family, the person you were talking to found a new job, so you don't have a champion. Like this is like a most difficult enterprise deal you will do,
Yep.
is selling your company. And we got connected around that time, I think,
Yep.
through a mutual contact of ours. And we started conversations around acquisition. And I think our conversation, maybe you were already prepared, like you had all the materials. So they went quite fast
Yep.
throughout, and then we ended up doing the deal. So, but from your perspective, what was the experience working with Helium and working with us on the acquisition?
Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned, right before we met, is when I had the term sheet. We were going to close with another potential acquirer, and then they backed out that week. And I think we spoke maybe the next week. And so you kind of telling me about your background, being a founder, selling your company, selling Stilt, and then now start with Helium, being in the service of founders and working with founders, for this really, option in the market for an acquisition. And so it really took matter of months where we got the deal closed. And so just the speed was something that was a breath of fresh air for me.
Yeah. And then we were on the phone all the time. And I remember I was actually on my way to India at the time on a Friday evening. It was, and I still remember it was like 2:30 a.m. That time. And I was like, Chase, like, I'll just ask the lawyers to just sign off on the docs, tell me what do you want, and like we'll close the docs. And we did. And
Yeah, because we had a deadline, because
yes.
we agreed to this deadline. And I mean, that's like another learning that I have, is the power of deadlines, especially in an acquisition. Because in acquisition, there are so many loose ends that have to be tied up, things you don't even think about. And
Uh-huh.
so having that deadline for both parties, I think was very beneficial, because you also have expectations, right? You're aligned on the expectations.
Yeah. As we close the deal, like, um, we continue to work together since the acquisition, and we continue to use your help, use your experience in the insurance world, because we had zero knowledge about insurance when we acquired the company, but we we just liked the product, and we realized that the product was actually useful to agents, and people were constantly using it. There were agents who were using the product for like 4 to 5 years, like since the day you started the company. Kind of those long-term relationships are more difficult to come by and be seen in products. And as we acquired the company, everything, the transition kind of went smoothly, and then we just took over and continued to run kind of with your help and support. So that kind of worked out well. And as we are continuing to run it, I think it's been way longer than our initial engagement period, as we realize, founders like working with founders, and we just want to make sure that the company continues to grow and continues to, deliver to customers.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, obviously, a thing that was important to me was, InsurGrid, continue to live on. And, we have a lot of great customers. And so, myself as one of the founders, I can still contribute and help out, even though, I'm not the CEO anymore. So it's been great. It's been great working with you and Priyank. And yeah, like you said, founders working with founders. And, as I'm working on other projects, like you've been a great sounding board and you've introduced me to different people, and so my network is expanding. So it's been very much a win-win.
Yeah. And maybe last thing around this is, as you were evaluating acquirers, what were you looking for? You shared a couple of learnings that you need to have a deadline, you need to have clear indication, and like larger companies take longer, smaller companies take faster for acquisition. What else, A, were you looking in the acquirer, and B, you learn from the process?
What I was looking for, obviously, is my fiduciary responsibility to get the best price for my investors. That goes without being said, obviously. But I think the other thing was just making sure that the team was taken care of. Those were really the two main things. And then what I learned is, a lot of these deals, it's a lot of trust. And so having relationships, building relationships that could lead to an acquisition when you're building your company, I think is important. And, we met through a mutual contact. And so that really helped in the process. And so, when you're building your company, even having some conversations that could lead nowhere, could lead to something. I had a friend that was very good about having conversations with potential partners, potential acquirers, and he would do this on a quarterly basis. And then, he ended up, getting acquired by someone he had talked to, for years.
Yeah. Sometimes we don't find enough time to talk to acquirers until it's too late. And obviously, there is no right answer to this. Yes, you should want to build a big company, but sometimes these conversations can help you sell your company if you don't hit the escape velocity, or the company may not turn out to be exactly what you thought.
I mean, and you want to always be talking to customers, but sometimes your customers can turn into an acquirer as well.
Yes. Especially true in any enterprise type of deal where your customers are so dependent on your product that they end up buying it. All of that makes sense. Now, as I started the conversation with you, look happier now. You're smiling again. So what's going on? What's next for you?
Yeah, so moved home. Our daughter was born a few months ago, which has been very fun. Working on a few projects and moving forward actually with a project in a completely different industry. So going from software into the hospitality space. So me and someone I'm close with back in Ohio, buying some property out in Hocking Hills, Ohio. So a whole new game, but it's been very fun so far.
Yeah, you're kind of the best of both worlds, learning something new in the hospitality space while keeping your eye close to the insurtech world and continue growing the company. And it's so fulfilling to see a product that you built continues to live, that customers are using and can't live without.
Yeah, a conversation that started Christmas 2018 is still alive. So yeah, it's been a great journey and learned a ton. And it's awesome to still be connected to InsurGrid, working alongside you guys, and being able to take, all the work, all the relationships that I built and try to help to, continue to grow InsurGrid. And I think it's going to be around for a while.
Yeah, awesome. We're excited to continue to build InsurGrid, and hopefully it grows leaps and bounds with your help and, become the standard in the industry. All right. Thank you, Chase. Thank you for building InsurGrid, and thank you for choosing us as the final home for InsurGrid.
Yeah, no problem. I'm glad we got connected when we did.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks, Chase.
Thanks, Rohit.